The broken arrangement. The morning light filtered through the cracked window panes of the small apartment above her father's textile shop, casting long shadows across Celeste Moreau's easel. Her paint-stained fingers trembled as she added the final touches to a watercolor landscape, rolling hills dotted with wildflowers that existed only in her imagination and dreams of escape. Celeste. Her father's voice boomed from downstairs, sharp with the kind of desperation she'd grown too familiar with over the past months. "Come down here, now!" She set down her brush with a heavy sigh, knowing that tone meant trouble. The past year had been nothing but trouble. Ever since their family's textile business began failing, customers had abandoned them for cheaper imports, leaving behind empty shelves and unpaid bills that mounted like storm clouds. Downstairs, her father paced the narrow space between bolts of unsold fabric, his graying hair disheveled and his usually kind eyes filled with a haunted look. Her mother sat quietly in the corner, her hands folded in her lap, unable to meet Celeste's gaze. "Papa, what's wrong?" Celeste asked, though she feared she already knew. The landlord had been by twice this week, and the bank notices had been piling up on their small kitchen table. "I've found a solution," he said, the words tumbling out quickly as if speed might make them easier to bear. "A way to save everything, the shop, our home, your future." Celeste's heart began to race. "What kind of solution?" Her father stopped pacing and looked directly at her, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Damon Blackthorne has agreed to purchase our debts and invest in the business. In exchange," he swallowed hard, "in exchange, you'll marry him." The words hit her like a physical blow. Damon Blackthorne, she knew the name, had heard it whispered in the market stalls and coffee shops around town. He was a man who bought failing businesses and transformed them into profitable ventures, but his methods were ruthless. People called him cold, calculating, a man who viewed everything in terms of assets and liabilities. "Papa, no," she whispered, backing toward the stairs. "You can't be serious." "He's already agreed," her mother finally spoke, her voice barely audible. "The arrangements have been made. The wedding is in 3 days." Celeste felt the walls of the small shop closing in around her. 3 days. In 3 days, she would belong to a man she'd never even met, a man whose reputation preceded him like winter frost. Her dreams of art school, of painting in Paris cafes, of choosing her own path, all of it crumbling like dried paint. "I won't do it," she said, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. "I won't marry a stranger just to save your business." Her father's face crumpled. "Sweet girl, if we don't accept his offer, we'll lose everything. The shop that's been in our family for 3 generations, this building where you grew up, it'll all be gone. We'll have nothing." "We'll have each other," she pleaded. "For how long?" he asked. "Until winter comes and we can't afford heat? Until we're living on the streets? Celeste, this man can give you everything. Security, comfort, a future. A future as his possession," she shot back, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. Her mother rose and approached slowly, reaching out to touch Celeste's face with gentle fingers. "He's not what the rumors say, darling. I've met him. He's intense, yes, but not cruel. And he specifically asked for you? Asked for me? What am I, merchandise?" "He saw your painting," her father admitted quietly. "The one you displayed in Madame Leclerc's gallery window last month. He inquired about the artist, and when he learned you were my daughter..." He trailed off, unable to finish. Celeste stared at them both, feeling as though she was drowning in the inevitability of it all. Her one moment of artistic recognition had become the chain that would bind her to a life she never wanted. In 3 days, she would walk down an aisle toward a man who had chosen her like he might select a piece of art for his collection. The paintbrush she'd been holding clattered to the floor, forgotten. Shadows and silk. The morning of her wedding arrived with gray skies and a bitter wind that rattled the windows of the small church. Celeste stood before the mirror in the cramped vestry, staring at her reflection in the ivory silk dress that had belonged to her grandmother. The fabric felt heavy against her skin, like a shroud rather than a celebration of love. Her hands shook as she tried to pin the delicate veil her mother had worn decades ago. Each attempt failed, the pins slipping from her trembling fingers to scatter across the wooden floor like fallen tears. She had barely slept in 3 days, her mind racing with thoughts of escape, of running away to Paris or London with nothing but her paintbrushes and whatever money she could gather. "Let me help you, darling." Her mother entered quietly, her own eyes red-rimmed from crying. She moved with the careful grace of someone trying to hold herself together, gathering the scattered pins and approaching her daughter with gentle hands. "I can't do this." "Mama," Celeste whispered, her voice breaking. "I keep thinking about what he might be like, what he might expect of me. What if he's cruel? What if he forbids me to paint? What if—" "Shh," her mother soothed, skillfully weaving the veil into Celeste's dark hair. "What if he's kind? What if he sees the beautiful, talented woman you are and cherishes you for it? You're borrowing trouble from tomorrow, my love." Through the small window, Celeste could see the imposing black carriages that had arrived to transport the wedding party to the Blackthorn estate. She had heard whispers about the mansion, a sprawling Gothic structure perched on the cliffs overlooking the sea, with towers that seemed to scrape the sky and gardens that stretched for miles. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of incense and organ music. Celeste walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her eyes focused straight ahead, afraid to look at the man waiting for her at the altar. When she finally dared to glance up, she was startled by what she saw. Damon Blackthorn was younger than she had expected. Perhaps 32 or 33, with dark hair swept back from a face that was more austere than handsome. His eyes, a startling shade of green, seemed to see straight through her, studying her with an intensity that made her cheeks burn. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a perfectly tailored black suit that emphasized his commanding presence. But what surprised her most was the gentleness in his voice when he spoke his vows. His words were traditional, formal, but there was something in his tone, a warmth that didn't match his fearsome reputation. When he slipped the wedding ring onto her finger, his touch was careful, almost reverent. The reception at his estate overwhelmed her senses. The mansion was even more magnificent than the rumors suggested, with soaring ceilings painted with classical frescoes and rooms filled with priceless artwork. Guests moved through the halls like elegant ghosts, their conversations a low murmur of business deals and social gossip that meant nothing to her. Damon stayed close to her side throughout the evening, introducing her to associates and friends with a quiet pride that confused her. His hand remained at the small of her back, warm and steady, an anchor in the sea of unfamiliar faces. When elderly ladies complimented her dress or beauty, he would smile, a genuine expression that transformed his entire face. "You look terrified," he murmured during a quiet moment when they stood alone on a balcony overlooking the gardens. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose that made her fingers itch for her paintbrushes. "I am," she admitted, surprised by her own honesty. "I don't know what you expect of me, what kind of wife you want me to be." He was quiet for a long moment, his hands resting on the stone balustrade as he gazed out at the sea. "I expect nothing more than what you're willing to give," he said finally. "I know this wasn't your choice, Celeste. I won't pretend this arrangement is ideal for either of us." "Then why?" she asked, turning to face him fully. "Why choose me? Why not find someone who actually wanted to marry you?" A shadow passed across his features, and for a moment she glimpsed something vulnerable beneath his composed exterior. "Because when I saw your painting in that gallery window, I saw something I'd forgotten existed. Hope. Beauty without calculation or agenda. I thought—" He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "I thought perhaps someone who could create such beauty might see something worth saving in me." That night, as the last guests departed and the servants cleared away the remnants of the celebration, Celeste found herself standing in the doorway of what she now understood to be their shared bedroom. The space was enormous, dominated by a 4-poster bed draped in midnight blue silk. Tall windows offered a view of the moonlit sea, and a fire crackled warmly in the marble fireplace. Damon was already there, having changed from his formal wear into a simple white shirt and dark trousers. He looked up when she entered, and she saw her own uncertainty reflected in his eyes. "I can sleep in one of the guest rooms if you prefer," he offered quietly. "There's no need for you to— That is, I don't expect—" She stared at him, this powerful man who controlled vast business empires, stumbling over words like a nervous schoolboy. "You're afraid too," she realized aloud. Terrified, he admitted with a rueful smile. "It's been a very long time since I've cared about someone else's comfort more than my own convenience." Something shifted between them in that moment of shared vulnerability. When she approached the bed, her movements were still uncertain, but no longer driven by fear. As she settled beneath the covers, leaving a careful distance between them, she felt his presence like warmth from the fireplace, protective rather than threatening. "Celeste," he said softly in the darkness, "I want you to know that your studio is ready. The room at the top of the East Tower, it has the best light in the house. Your easel is there, and I've had art supplies delivered from Paris. You should never stop painting." For the first time since learning of their arrangement, she felt something other than despair. As sleep finally claimed her, she found herself wondering if perhaps her new husband was not the monster she had imagined, but simply another soul searching for connection in a world that had taught them both to guard their hearts carefully. Colors in the darkness. The morning sun, streaming through the tall windows, woke Celeste earlier than usual. For a moment, she forgot where she was, expecting to see the familiar cracks in the ceiling of her childhood bedroom. Instead, she found herself surrounded by luxury she had only dreamed of, silk sheets that felt like water against her skin, and a bed so large she had to stretch to reach its edges. Damon was already gone, though the slight indentation in the pillow next to hers and the lingering scent of sandalwood told her he had been there through the night. True to his word, he had made no demands of her, though she had been acutely aware of his presence in the darkness, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth radiating from his side of the bed. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, pulling a silk robe around herself. A young woman entered with a breakfast tray, her smile warm and genuine. "Good morning, Mrs. Blackthorne. I'm Anne, your personal maid. Mr. Blackthorne asked me to show you to your studio when you're ready." The title still felt foreign on her tongue, but Celeste nodded gratefully. After a breakfast of fresh pastries and perfectly brewed coffee, Anne led her through a maze of corridors and up a spiraling staircase to the top of the East Tower. When the door opened, Celeste gasped. The circular room was bathed in perfect natural light from windows that offered panoramic views of the sea and surrounding countryside. Her easel stood ready in the center, surrounded by tables laden with art supplies. Paints in colors she had never been able to afford, brushes of every size and type, canvases stretched and waiting. But what took her breath away was the wall of her own paintings. Every piece she had ever created, including several she thought had been lost, hung carefully arranged in a display that transformed her amateur efforts into something that looked almost professional. "He bought them all," Anne explained quietly. "Spent weeks tracking down every painting you'd ever sold or given away. Said they belonged together, with their creator." Celeste moved through the room in wonder, touching the familiar surfaces of her work with trembling fingers. Here was the landscape she had painted of the meadow behind her childhood home. There, the portrait of old Mrs. Davidson, who used to buy fabric from her father's shop. Each piece represented a moment in her life, a feeling she had tried to capture and preserve. She spent the morning painting, losing herself in the familiar rhythm of brush against canvas. For the first time in weeks, her mind felt quiet, focused only on the play of light across the water visible through the window. She was so absorbed that she didn't notice when the door opened behind her. "You've already started." Damon's voice was soft, careful not to startle her. She turned to find him watching her with that same intense expression she had noticed at their wedding, but now she could read something different in it, not calculation, but appreciation, perhaps even awe. "It's perfect," she said, gesturing around the room. How did you know exactly what I needed? I studied art history at university, he admitted, stepping closer to examine her morning's work. I always regretted not pursuing it further, but my father had other plans for me. Building the family business became my only acceptable passion. There was bitterness in his voice that made her look at him more closely. She was beginning to understand that Damon Blackthorne, like herself, had sacrificed his dreams to family duty. What would you have painted? She asked. Portraits, I think. I was always fascinated by the idea of capturing not just how someone looks, but who they really are beneath the surface. He paused, his eyes meeting hers. Perhaps you could teach me. I'm sure I'm terribly out of practice, but... Yes, she said immediately, surprising them both with her enthusiasm. Yes, I'd like that. They began spending their afternoons together in the studio. Damon proved to have a natural talent that had been dormant for years, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he learned to control the brush. Celeste found herself watching him as much as her own canvas, fascinated by the way his stern features relaxed when he painted, revealing glimpses of the man he might have been in a different life. You were right, she told him one afternoon as they cleaned their brushes together. The autumn light was fading, turning the sea beyond the windows to liquid gold. About what? About seeing hope in my paintings. I think I painted them because I was looking for something beautiful in a world that often felt gray and difficult. He set down his brush and turned to face her fully. And have you found it? The beauty you were searching for? She considered the question seriously, looking around at the studio he had created for her, remembering the gentleness in his voice when he spoke his wedding vows, the way he had never once made her feel like a burden or an obligation. I'm beginning to, she said softly. That evening, they dined together in a small, intimate room rather than the formal dining hall. The conversation flowed more easily now, moving from art to books to their childhoods. Celeste learned that Damon had grown up lonely in this very mansion, with parents who viewed him more as an heir than a son. He had been sent to boarding school at 8, home only for holidays that felt more like business meetings than family gatherings. I used to climb up to that very studio, he confessed over wine that made her feel warm and relaxed. I'd sit there for hours sketching the view and imagining what it would be like to have someone to share it with. And now you do, she said, then blushed at her own boldness. Now I do, he agreed, his voice carrying a weight of emotion that made her heart flutter in an entirely unfamiliar way. That night, when they retired to their bedroom, the careful distance between them seemed less necessary. Not gone entirely, they were still learning to trust each other, but diminished. When his hand accidentally brushed hers as they settled into bed, neither of them pulled away. Celeste, he said quietly in the darkness. Yes, thank you. For giving this a chance, for giving me a chance. She turned toward him, though she could barely make out his profile in the moonlight streaming through the windows. Thank you for the studio, for understanding what it means to me. It means everything to you, he said simply. That makes it important to me too. As she drifted off to sleep, Celeste realized that somewhere in the space between fear and acceptance, between duty and choice, something entirely unexpected was beginning to bloom. It felt fragile still, like a wildflower pushing through rocky soil, but it was undeniably there, the first stirrings of something that might, given time and care, grow into love. The storm within. 3 months into their marriage, Celeste had begun to think of the mansion as home rather than a beautiful prison. Her days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Mornings in the studio painting, afternoons exploring the vast gardens or reading in the library, evenings sharing dinner and conversation with Damon. The careful politeness of their early interactions had given way to genuine companionship, and sometimes in unguarded moments, something that felt like the beginning of deeper affection. She had grown to love their evening painting sessions, watching Damon's face transform as he lost himself in creating something beautiful. His latest project was a portrait of the sunset over the sea, and she found herself marveling at how someone with such a fearsome business reputation could capture light and color with such sensitivity. You're staring, he said, without looking up from his canvas. though she could hear the smile in his voice. "I'm studying your technique," she protested, but they both knew it wasn't entirely true. She had become fascinated by the contradictions in her husband. The way his hands could be ruthless in business negotiations, but gentle when mixing paints. The way his voice could be cold as winter when dealing with incompetent employees, but warm as summer when he asked about her day. Their peaceful existence was shattered on a gray November morning when Damon burst into the studio, his face darker than she had ever seen it. In his hand, he clutched a newspaper, the pages wrinkled from his tight grip. "We need to talk," he said, his voice carrying an edge that made her stomach clench with anxiety. She set down her brush and followed him to his study, a room she rarely entered. It was decidedly masculine, with dark wood paneling and leather-bound books. But what caught her attention were the papers scattered across his desk: contracts, financial statements, and what looked like investigative reports. "Someone is trying to destroy me," he said without preamble, tossing the newspaper onto the desk. The headline made her blood run cold. "Blackthorn Empire built on corruption. Exclusive investigation reveals decades of illegal practices. Is it true?" She whispered, though part of her already knew the answer from the anguish in his eyes. "Some of it," he admitted, running his hands through his dark hair. "My father. He cut corners, bribed officials, manipulated markets. When I inherited the business, I found evidence of practices that would have sent him to prison. I've spent the last 10 years quietly making amends, returning money, changing how we operate, but apparently someone has been watching and waiting." Celeste sank into one of the leather chairs, trying to process this revelation. "Who would do this? And why now?" "Victor Romano!" Damon's voice was bitter. "A competitor who's been trying to acquire several of my companies for years. He's been digging into my family's past, gathering evidence." "But Celeste..." His voice broke slightly. "The timing isn't coincidental. He knows about you, about our marriage. There are photographs." He handed her a manila envelope with trembling hands. Inside were surveillance photos of her, walking in the gardens, painting in her studio, sharing intimate dinners with Damon. But worse were the articles that accompanied them, painting her as either a naive victim or a willing accomplice in his supposed crimes. "They're going to use me against you," she realized, her voice hollow. "Romano wants to portray this as a marriage of convenience, a way for me to appear more respectable while continuing my father's corrupt practices. He's suggesting that you were bought, that our marriage is just another business transaction." The words stung because there was enough truth in them to be believable. Their marriage had begun as a business transaction, even if it had evolved into something more genuine. "What do we do?" she asked. Before he could answer, Anne burst into the study without knocking, her usually composed demeanor shattered. "Mr. Blackthorn, there are men at the gates. They say they're reporters, but they look more like hired thugs. They're demanding to speak with Mrs. Blackthorn." Damon was on his feet immediately, his protective instincts overriding everything else. "Double the security. No one gets onto the property without my express permission. And Anne, make sure all the staff understand that Mrs. Blackthorn is not to be approached by anyone from the media." The next few days were a nightmare of siege. Reporters camped outside the gates, shouting questions whenever anyone entered or left the property. The phone rang constantly with requests for interviews or statements. Damon hired additional security and had the windows in the main floors tinted to prevent photographers from capturing images from a distance. But the isolation took its toll on Celeste. She felt trapped, unable even to walk in the gardens without fear of telephoto lenses capturing her every move. Her painting suffered as anxiety clouded her mind, and she found herself jumping at every unexpected sound. The breaking point came when she discovered that reporters had somehow obtained her childhood address. They were harassing her parents, camping outside their modest apartment and the textile shop, asking invasive questions about the arranged marriage and whether money had changed hands. "I have to go to them," she told Damon that evening, finding him in his study surrounded by legal documents and crisis management strategies. "They don't deserve this. They're old, and they're frightened. And this is all my fault." "It's not your fault," he said firmly. looking up from a contract with eyes that were red-rimmed from lack of sleep. This is Romano's doing, and mine for not dealing with my father's legacy sooner. But if I hadn't married you, then you'd be living in poverty while your parents lost everything anyway. Celeste, you can't blame yourself for other people's cruelty. But she could see the doubt in his eyes, the same question that had been plaguing her own mind. Would she have been better off never knowing him at all? The painting studio, the comfortable life, the growing affection between them, was any of it worth this public humiliation and the danger it brought to everyone she cared about? That night she lay awake listening to Damon's restless breathing beside her. She knew he was awake too, both of them trapped in their own spiral of guilt and uncertainty. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. Maybe we should separate. Publicly, I mean. Let me give interviews saying the marriage was a mistake, that I was coerced. Maybe if I distance myself from you. No. His response was immediate and fierce. I won't let you sacrifice yourself to save my reputation. Besides, it wouldn't work. Romano doesn't want to destroy just my business. He wants to destroy me personally. He sees you as my weakness, and he'll keep coming after you regardless. She turned to face him in the darkness, able to make out his profile in the moonlight. Then what do? We fight back, he said quietly. Together. But Celeste, I need you to know. If you want to leave, really leave, I'll understand. I'll make sure you're protected, that you have everything you need to start over somewhere else. I won't hold you to vows you made under duress. The offer hung between them in the darkness, and Celeste realized that this was the moment that would define not just their marriage, but who she was as a person. She could run, return to the safety of anonymity, let Damon face his demons alone, or she could stay and fight for something that had surprised them both with its unexpected depth and authenticity. I'm not going anywhere, she said finally. We're in this together, remember? For better or worse, I believe those were the words we used. She felt rather than saw his smile in the darkness, and when his hand found hers beneath the covers, she intertwined their fingers without hesitation. Whatever came next, they would face it as partners, not as strangers bound by circumstance. The war for their future was about to begin. But for the first time since the scandal broke, Celeste felt something stronger than fear or doubt. She felt the power of choice and the knowledge that she had chosen love over safety, partnership over solitude. Whatever happened next, it would be on their own terms. Canvas of the heart. The turning point came from an unexpected source. Celeste was in her studio, trying to lose herself in painting despite the chaos swirling around their lives, when Anne knocked softly on the door. Mrs. Blackthorne, there's someone here to see you. She says she's a journalist, but she seems different from the others. Celeste set down her brush with a sigh. Tell her what we've told all the rest. No interviews, no statements. She says she has information about Mr. Romano that you need to hear. And ma'am, she knows about the charitable foundation. That caught Celeste's attention. The charitable foundation was something Damon had never publicized, an organization he had quietly established to help families affected by his father's past business practices. Very few people knew it existed, and fewer still knew of Damon's personal involvement. Against her better judgment, Celeste agreed to meet with the woman. Isabel Santos was nothing like the aggressive reporters who had been hounding them. She was in her 40s, with intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor that suggested someone who had seen enough of the world to recognize truth from fiction. Mrs. Blackthorne, I'm going to be direct with you, Isabel said as they sat in the morning room overlooking the gardens. Victor Romano approached me 6 months ago with a story about your husband. He offered me a substantial sum to write an expose that would destroy Damon Blackthorne's reputation and business empire. Celeste felt her heart sink. And you're here to tell me you're writing it? On the contrary, I'm here to tell you why I refused, and why I think you need to know what Romano is really after. Isabel pulled out a thick folder from her briefcase. I spent months investigating the claims Romano made about your husband. What I found was fascinating. Over the next hour, Isabel laid out a story that was far more complex than the simplified narrative the scandal sheets were pushing. Yes, Damon's father had engaged in corrupt practices, but the evidence showed that Damon had spent the last decade methodically dismantling those systems and making restitution to victims. The charitable foundation has quietly returned over $50 million to families and communities harmed by the previous generation's business practices, Isabel explained. Your husband could have buried the evidence and continued the profitable corruption. Instead, he chose to do the right thing, even though it cost him personally. Then why is Romano doing this? Celeste asked. Because your marriage changed the game, Isabel said with a slight smile. Romano's original plan was to force your husband into a merger by threatening to expose the family's secrets. But when Damon married you, he gained something Romano hadn't counted on: public sympathy. A powerful businessman with a wife who clearly loves him is much harder to destroy than a cold, isolated figure. Clearly loves him? Celeste repeated, surprised by her own reaction to the words. Mrs. Blackthorne, I've been watching you both for months. The way you look at each other, the way you stand together, even under pressure, that's not something that can be faked. Romano underestimated the power of genuine affection. That evening, Celeste found Damon in his study, surrounded by the legal documents that had become his constant companions. She set Isabel's folder on his desk and watched his expression change as he read through the investigative report. She wants to publish this? He asked finally. She wants to tell the real story, but only if we're willing to be completely honest about everything, including how our marriage began. Damon looked up at her, and she could see the war between hope and caution in his eyes. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny? For everyone to know that our marriage started as a business arrangement? Are you prepared for them to know that it's become something entirely different? She countered. The smile that spread across his face was like watching the sun rise. What exactly has it become, Celeste? She moved around the desk to stand beside him, her heart hammering in her chest as she prepared to voice what she had been feeling for weeks, but had been too afraid to acknowledge. It's become love, she said simply. Somewhere between your kindness and your understanding, between shared dinners and painting lessons, between your gentleness and your strength, I fell in love with you, Damon Blackthorne. Completely and irrevocably. He stood slowly, his hands coming up to frame her face with a reverence that made her breath catch. I fell in love with you the moment I saw your painting in that gallery window. But I fell in love with the woman behind the art, slowly, day by day, watching you find your strength and choose to stay when anyone else would have run. When he kissed her, it was nothing like the chaste, formal kiss they had shared at their wedding. This was passion and promise, longing and fulfillment all wrapped together. It was the kiss of two people who had found each other against all odds and refused to let the world tear them apart. The interview with Isabel. Santos ran as a cover story in the country's most respected news magazine. Instead of a scandalous expose, it was a love story, the tale of two people who had found real partnership in an arranged marriage, and a man who had quietly spent years making amends for his family's past mistakes. The public response was overwhelmingly positive. Romano's smear campaign crumbled in the face of documented evidence of Damon's charitable works and the obvious genuine affection between the couple. Several of Romano's own questionable business practices came to light during the investigation, and he found himself facing the kind of scrutiny he had tried to direct at others. But the real victory wasn't in the court of public opinion. It was in the quiet moments that followed. Celeste's parents visited for Christmas, marveling at their daughter's happiness and the man who clearly cherished her. The textile business was not only saved, but thriving under Damon's guidance and investment. On New Year's Eve, Celeste and Damon stood together on the balcony of their bedroom, watching fireworks light up the sky over the sea. The year had tested them in ways neither could have imagined, but they had emerged stronger and more united. Do you ever regret it? Damon asked quietly, his arms wrapped around her from behind. The way we started? The fact that you never got to choose this freely? Celeste leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her spine. I did choose, she said. Maybe not at the beginning, but every day since then. Every morning when I wake up beside you, every evening when we paint together, every moment when I could walk away but choose to stay instead, those are all choices. Damon. And I choose you, over and over again. In her studio the next morning, Surrounded by canvases that now depicted not just imaginary beauty but real happiness, Celeste began work on her masterpiece, a portrait of two figures standing together against a stormy sky, their faces turned not toward the chaos around them but toward each other. It was a painting that would hang in galleries someday, but its real purpose was simpler. It was proof that love could grow in the most unlikely soil, and that sometimes the most beautiful art comes from the marriage of necessity and choice, duty and desire, fear and courage. The merchant's daughter had found her fairy tale after all, but it was better than any story in books. It was real, it was chosen, and it was entirely their own.